in Genesis, in Eden, we were God's people in God's place with God's purpose. And so what I talk about with community is we need to be a people in a place with a purpose. And I think
Love
those
that.
three things, whether you talk about it with your church, even nation, right? We're a people. We are in a specific place with a specific purpose, the
That's so good.
Constitution. I think that to me is the building block for bringing back order to the chaos that we're seeing.
Welcome back to the Going Deeper podcast. Today, I'm very excited because I'm joined by my editor, Eddie Larow. Eddie, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be on. I've always enjoyed it. So
Good. Okay, so give us a little introduction into just who you are and what you do.
yeah. So as Justine said, I'm an editor. I work with Baker Books. We're based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And basically, we look for books that help people find a better way to live, which, of course, as Christians is in Christ. And so we're really looking for books that help build up the body of Christ. And, my passion is I'm evangelical. And I know there's a lot of negativity and stigma around that word, but I love being an evangelical. And so I look for other evangelicals out there like Justine and try to partner with them and help their voices get out there. So that's what I do. But yeah. And
Yeah,
so
and
Justine and I are working on a project, so it's fun.
it is fun. I think there are some people listening that would be intrigued to kind of know what does an acquisitions editor do, like
hmm
maybe just high level. I mean, what does your job description entail?
Yeah. I mean, most kids in high school don't go through high school saying, I want to be an acquisitions editor, right? They're usually, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer.
Yeah.
Maybe you got like the one nerdy kid in AP English who's like, yeah, I want to be an editor. But most people don't know what an acquisitions editor is. And so if you're asking that question, you're not alone. I bet 98% of people are saying that as well. So basically, an acquisitions editor, as an acquisitions editor, my job is to acquire. So that's what I'm doing, acquiring books. And part of it is with acquisitions editing, is that, it's, I think the way people think of editing is you sit in a room, you're reading a manuscript, you look at words, and you're just making sure grammar's right. But there's actually a whole other level to it, which is, the field of ideas. So what my job is I kind of listen to what's going on in the world and then listen for voices who are talking on either topics or like your podcast. I saw that. Just people who I think are contributing to dialogue and discourse. And my job then is to kind of play the role of like connector. So then I reach out and say, hey, my name's Eddie, and I'm a fan of your work, and then we kind of hit it off and talk. And so in some ways, it's like one part, um, you know, personal connection, another part thinking and ideas, and then the third part, which is also just as valuable, is the editing portion.
Yeah.
So of course, you and I know we go back and forth, but it just involves me working with authors on the book, making sure that the content and the concept is sharp, and making sure that the arguments flow. And so yeah, definitely more high level editing. We have project editors who, once me and the author are done and we're like, okay, I think this product is good, then it goes to the project editors who do more of the, this has to match the Chicago manual, things like that.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, do
Yeah.
you know Jerry Maguire? You know that movie with Tom
Yeah.
Hanks, or not Tom Hanks, with Tom Cruise?
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
he's the agent, right? He goes out and he finds the talent. That's kind of like an acquisitions editor in some ways. So
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and I don't know, I don't even know if I've shared this, but with the people that listen, I know I've obviously shared it with some family, but the way that like our connection happened was totally of God, and in my story was very much like just dropped from the sky. And it's pretty cool. I remember, well, I've been working towards this book for a really long time. I felt the Lord very clearly call me to authorship back in 2018, but I didn't even have a book idea at the time. I
mhm,
didn't even think that becoming an author was realistic. I just was like, okay, well, I guess I'll trust you and I'll lean into that. I don't know.
mhm,
But I'd always wanted to be a writer. And, back in seventh grade, I had thought, oh, yeah, I want to write books. but it was more this sort of unrealistic pipe dream, I guess you could say, in the future. And, so I started working on it. Well, then when I finally got a book idea in 2022 and I just started drafting the proposal on it and doing that over and over and over and over and over again, I started pitching to agents and there was just one door closed after another. And I finally got to a place where I just thought, I the Lord's just I'm gonna have a miraculous encounter with an agent or an editor on an airplane. Like, that's how this is gonna happen. And it wasn't but, like, a week later that our mutual friend just texted me out of the blue, and we only talk, like, twice a year, and she was like, "Hey, by the way, I had this editor join my small group." And I was like, "No, you didn't."
Yep.
And she's like, "Yeah, he works at Baker Books." And I'm like, "No, he doesn't. What?" And then it was just like one, open door after another, and it was
Yeah.
just crazy how that happened, and that does give me confidence that the Lord was very much in charge of all the details from the beginning, and so it's just cool, and I'm sure it's cool from your perspective to be the one on the other side of, like, I'm, in a sense, getting allowing these people's dreams to come true by,
Yeah.
being that liaison between where they wanna be,
Mhm. And what's funny is I think of this a little bit because Becca, oh, I guess I don't know if I should have said the mutual friend's name, but
That's
she
fun.
she and my wife, Audrey, have a book group now, and they meet, every other week, every other Saturday, I think, and they're reading books. And I was like, oh man, Justine would like love this. So I think somehow we got to like get you
Yes.
into the book group, like have you drive up.
I love that. I love a book club. I'm
Yep.
definitely that nerd, for
Yeah.
sure. Well, and it's actually funny because I serve in high school ministry, and I have 10th grade girls, and,
Hmm.
we were going around in one of the Sundays, and they were talking about how much they love to read, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I love to read too." But in my mind, I read nonfiction, like,
Yeah.
95% of the time. I will read fiction, and I can devour a really good fiction book, but it's
Hmm.
gotta be the right topic and, all that stuff, genre. And I remember them, like, looking at me like, "You like to read nonfiction?" I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kinda all I read," but most people who are readers read fiction, so
Yeah.
kinda feel a little left out there, but
Well, that's me too. I think 99% of the books that I own, I would actually say 99.8% of the books I own are nonfiction.
yeah. One of my best friends is, like, a ferocious reader, and all
Mhm.
she does is read nonfiction, and I'm like, "This is why we are good for each other because
Yeah.
we're just constantly like, 'What are you reading? What are you reading? What are you reading?'" I'm like, "Well, I've got,
Mhm.
like, 4 going at one time."
Yeah.
And, but so the reason that I'm having you on, I thought about having you on before any of this sort of article book
Mhm.
thing happened because I think it would be an interesting conversation to talk with an editor and people, kind of getting a behind the scenes look at what you do.
Hey, and we're
But
friends too. Just so your readers don't think or your listeners don't think that we're
uh,
just editor-author
yes,
relationship. We're friends too. So
exactly. Well, and we're very similar in age.
yeah,
I think,
I'm 31.
yeah, you're 1 year older than me. Yes.
Mhm. I'm an old man.
Yeah. You've got the button down and everything. Look at you.
Yep. Yep.
So, but out of the blue, you had sent me an article that you had written, and I didn't even know you wrote articles. And I was like, "Oh, cool. I'll read this." And I read it and I thought, "Wow, you're really hitting the nail on the head here of." I think one thing that I think the gift of a writer is to be able to articulate a feeling or a thing that people are already experiencing, they just don't have words for.
Mhm.
And that's what I felt like you did in the article when the Gen Z longs for home, and I read it and I
Mhm.
thought, I'm seeing this all over social media, kind of what you're
Mhm.
describing, but I've never seen anybody really put it into words. And then it was like 2 weeks later that you texted me. So kind of lay out the timeline of how this has
Yeah.
all happened. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were just talking off camera, but I'll bring it on camera now about how I got to love reading. I hated reading growing up. As a kid, I was a big basketball kid, been playing since I was like 2 years old, loved sports and just hated reading. I honestly just could not stand it. And my mom loves to read, and she basically tried to incentivize me. She said, "Hey, if you, I bought you this To Kill a Mockingbird book, which I still have. It has a little letter from my mom in it. She says, I bought this for you. If you read it, I'll give you $5." And, I think I begrudgingly read it. I enjoyed it, but
You
I
didn't
just
try to
didn't
bargain with her on the price, like, you didn't up the ante to 10?
know. I think I was young enough to think, well, $5. Also, like, early 2000s, like $5 could actually buy you something.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Um, I, so my mom did that, and we didn't really see a lot of progress on that front. And I think I remember in third or fourth grade, and ever since this writing stuff has been stimulated for me, my mom actually framed this picture that I have, and the picture is of me as J.R.R. Tolkien as a third grader. We had to do a wax museum, and so I dressed up as him for the wax museum, and I
Stop.
had my Lord of the Rings book in my hands, and they would people would come up and press like a button by you. It was really cool concept. I mean, third grade, this is
That's
pretty advanced.
hilarious.
And I
Yeah.
had a whole spiel about, Lord of the Rings, and
Wow.
so I really was drawn to that. But I don't think I really loved reading until I became a Christian. And one of the things that I think changed for me was obviously when you become a Christian. I remember I was in college when I became a Christian, and I had an audio Bible. It was like a New King James kind of dramatized version. And I remember being in, like, I go in a little study room to do my schoolwork, and I just throw that on sometimes in between. And man, I just got like so captivated into scripture, like just especially the Gospel of John, just like hearing Jesus. And it was just for me a really moving experience. And it kind of led me down this path of wanting to be in ministry, and that led me into publishing. And so before you know it, my parents still joke to this day. We have a group chat, and they still make fun of me that my mom says the boy who hated to read now is writing a book. And so, that's kind of that's kind of where it's at. I think for me, it wasn't really anything external but internal. I mean, God did a work in me. And um so anyway, so the thing with the article, you had asked me as well, how long have I wanted to write a book? I would say I haven't really thought about writing a book. I actually tell people, if you're grow up and you're just like, I'm gonna write a book someday, I'm gonna write a book someday. I feel like that's very different than, like you said, in 2018, you were like, I feel like the Lord's calling me to write a book.
Huh?
For me, I don't think I had like a real, I'm going to write a book moment. My wife has always said, Hey, I think you're going to write a book someday. And I always tell her, no, no one cares what I have to say. And I had some writing going at First Things. They're my favorite magazine just because I think they do a lot of very, very thoughtful work across kind of a spectrum. Like obviously they have like Catholics, they have Eastern Orthodox, they have Protestants like me. And I just really love engaging in that cultural dialogue. But one of the things that, getting to your question about the concept, one of the things that really impacted me is, I guess you and I are similar. We're both Zillennials, as I call us. Like we're Gen Z
Wow.
millennials. Like
Yeah.
we grew up and we experienced, Arthur and all these like Zaboomafoo and Zoom, all these like, millennial things. I remember my parents at Christmas, they had the gigantic video recorders and stuff, like just stuff like most millennials are like, oh yeah, I remember that. But at the same time, we grew up at the back end of the development of social media and the internet. I mean, so you and I were in eighth or seventh grade when the iPhone came out. And so from my perspective, you and I kind of our age demographic, and Charlie Kirk was 31 too, is like we kind of have this interesting dynamic where we grew up with millennial kind of tradition and so to speak, but then at the same time we grew up friends with a lot of Gen Z. I'm the oldest of six, and all my younger siblings are pretty much Gen Z. And so for me, one of the things that I was realizing is, Gen Z was polarizing. What I saw was Gen Z women, especially, um, and I say this with a heart for them. My wife is she's 6 years younger than me. My wife is Gen Z. Um, but there's this draw on social media for a lot of Gen Z women where there's this almost pseudo community formed where people are like, oh man, like this movement or this trend, like I want to be involved with it. Like what I like to say is like we crave connection and we crave community. And what ends up happening is some of these counterfeit communities crave us, right? Social media craves us. It's like, you need to join this movement. You see this thing where you're going to make fun of your husband or, speak poorly about men. Like some young women are like, well, this is going to give me a sense of belonging. And so I saw, on the one hand, the progressive shift among women. On the other hand, with men, I just saw a really bad shift. And obviously, I'm conservative, but like way far to the right, like just to some scary areas like anti-Semitism. Um, and so, what I actually thought about, and again, I'm not like people to say this to me, I'm not a Gen Z expert, but I just grew up among Gen Z. One of the things I realized was I think those two problems are related. And I think people hadn't really talked about it that way. They usually try and deal with them separately. Like women are going progressive. Oh no. Oh, men are getting really, really far right and going into extremes. But to me, it was like, actually, this all comes back to one thing, which is
Hmm.
we are searching for community and for home. And we're finding these in false areas. And I kind of coined a phrase. I have an article coming out called Nomadic Modernity. So I'll use one of my
Ooh, with
prompts
who?
with first things.
Okay, cool.
Um, so this is called Liquid Modernity, Zygmunt Bauman. It's more of an academic book, but really, really important because he basically argues in it that modernity, so the modern world, right, like technology, social media, all of this modern stuff that we have, has led us to pursue progress for progress's sake. So basically, like, you can't just sit down and be still. You have to always be moving. You have to always be inventing yourself. And so for him, it was that, you know, liquid modernity is, water can be an ice or be ice and solid. And then over time it can melt and then kind of form whatever it wants. So for him, it's this kind of shifting between solid and liquid. Like I want to be what I want to be. And so I think that was really helpful for me. But one thing I really don't appreciate about it, and I say this because he is a genius and like I don't have the
Is he a
degrees that he has.
believer?
No, he's not.
Okay,
And he's actually pretty, I think he's
an
more,
atheist.
yeah, and I think he's more socialistic if I remember
Okay,
right. So this book is not like a hey,
right.
every Christian should read this
It's
book.
yeah,
It's just a
research
helpful,
on
yeah, diagnosis. But
yeah.
one thing I found about it was like I felt like I think we're more like nomads. And I got that more from Augustine. I've been reading City of God. And the way that Augustine kind of handles the city of God and the city of man, it just made me think like there's a way to be rooted in the city of God, in the city of man. And I think that's what Augustine's getting at in the whole work. I mean, it's a massive work. And so that actually led me to this concept called nomadic modernity, which I put in that article, the first one. I hinted at it. I had a little section there where I said we're kind of like nomads. And the reason I did that is because with nomadic tribes, they kind of make their home wherever they go to, and they're constantly moving. They're like, we've used up all the animals in this region, or maybe the seasons change. We're going to go over here now. And there's no like resting place. And
Hmm,
so for me, I think that's a more accurate description of what Gen Z is going through because it's
yeah,
nomadic for them. They're
yeah.
moving to the next movement and they think it's going to be a home, and they go to this next spot, they think it's going to be a home. But my argument that I'm trying to make here is that ultimately it'll be found in Christ, but Christ has given us each other. And so it's found
Mm,
in community with each other. And so
yeah,
that's kind of the background of the
yeah. Well, and
article.
I wanna back up and give a little bit of context, which I probably should have given a little bit beforehand, but for those that are listening. He well, and let me ask this question. You just became interested in this just because you started noticing this and then you were just trying to figure it out. And because you were writing for First Things, this was sort of just an article idea that came
Hmm.
about. Okay, so
Yeah.
you write this article for First Things, Gen Z longs for home, which I'll make sure to link this in the description of the podcast. But essentially, which they'll tell by the title, but it was sort of basically what you were just describing, breaking down this interesting cultural phenomenon that we're seeing online
Hmm.
with you were kind of talking about you see it in the political spaces, but you're also seeing it with just like online trends and all different sorts of tribalism, all these different things where people like identity is really really big
Hmm.
um and so I kind of want to give that context because what happened is that you write this article and then it kind of blows up,
Hmm.
right? Did you
Yeah.
expect that? Were you surprised by that?
No, if you look at my writing at First Things, the first piece that I did for them was on It's called Outlaws of the American Dream, and I looked
Fitting.
at how country music, because I'm a big old school country guy, and so for me, listening to Waylon Jennings, Merle Haggard, um, listening to their music, I'm always like, man, there's like something raw about this. And then I saw, Post Malone had his country album come out. I was like, it's so interesting. And Oliver Anthony, right? His song. I was like, it's so interesting that Gen Z is interested in country again, but like real gritty country, not like,
Like,
Luke
Beyonce's
Bryan.
album was kind of
Yeah.
like yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a and to me, I I saw that trend and I wanted to write on it. So I pitched it to First Things. And basically my argument in that piece was not only is it kind of a dual biography of Merle Haggard and which I'm going to say this, Merle Haggard and Waylon Jennings were born the same year. Both of their parents were in, I think, the Church of Christ or Church of God. I can't remember which one. I think it was Church of Christ. Both of their fathers left the picture. Both of their mothers really wanted them to be, solid Christian believers, and both kind of went through this rambunctious period of their lives. So there's a parallel there that's crazy.
fascinating.
But I think what I was arguing in the piece is that they really hooked into something that people are longing for, which is authenticity. People want authentic music, and I think back in the day in the country, that's what it was. It was authentic. It was, I'm going through this problem, and obviously people make fun of it, and they're like, "Oh, it's all about drinking and stuff." And it's like, well, back in the day, it was like these people are really longing, and they're like, you know, telling
Searching.
telling the truth. It's not like
Yeah.
a fun identity thing like nowadays. It's like, oh, we go to tailgates, blah blah blah. It was like, no, my mother died and I turned to alcohol. That's kind of the context for them.
Right.
Like
Right.
it was very, very hard. So I wrote that piece and it didn't get as much traction, which is fine. And then I wrote another piece on Bob Dylan, because I'm also interested in Bob
You
Dylan.
love Bob Dylan, yeah.
So I wrote a piece on Bob Dylan. I went through I guess people talk about like Taylor Swift era. I went through my Bob Dylan era, like
It's amazing.
and
Amazing.
got that out of my system. It was great. I enjoyed it. I watched the movie and kind of reviewed it. But yeah, this piece kind of hit me. I don't know what I was doing. I think I was making kind of writing it out, and the nomadic piece kind of hit me, and I was like, I should probably flesh this out more.
Mhm.
So I had a friend who's in a bigger publishing house, and I just, I trust him. He's kind of a mentor to me in a lot of ways. And I sent it to him, and I said, hey, does this have a shot? Like, I sent him the first proposal. I concept was terrible. Like, it was. I think I called it Restless Homes or something. Like, it wasn't that great. But he saw it, and he's like, did you send this to anyone else? And I said no, and he's like, well, can you draft up a full proposal? And I was like,
Wow.
well, I work in the business, but now I'm intimidated. I was like, it's one thing to talk and help you, Justine, right? Because it's like, that's your work. I can help you. I'm better at that.
Yeah.
But when someone's like, hey, can you do this? I was like a little bit scared. So um, I reached out to a couple agents, had some interviews, and decided on the agent that I chose because she saw it right away. She's like, oh yeah, I think this could be something. So we basically worked together, me and the agent, and the end title for now, until the publisher decides to change it, is After Progress: How an Ancient Faith Roots a Modern Restless World. And
So good. So
so it's
good.
basically looking at how progress. So I use three strands of progress: technology, um, internal progress, and societal progress. So technology would be like AI, specifically more on like people talking about fusing us with AI and doing all sorts of, crazy stuff.
Wackadoodle things, yeah. Yeah.
And I talk about like what's the end goal of that, which I get back to Genesis 3, right? It's, did God really say? It's like, well, when Eve was tempted, it's with this knowledge. It's something that we want. And so I just see that in the technology space. And then the second is internal, which it was funny. My friend Alan Noble, I sent it to him and I totally overlooked this, but he's like, you talk a lot about, people using drugs now, people using yoga and stuff. He's like, what about exercise? And I thought, wow, I didn't think about that. But like specifically online, like there's a big movement with like, kind of perfecting yourself internally through exercise, which is, I'm not against exercise. I go to the gym all the time, but so I incorporated that in that section. And then the third was societal, where basically I look at how there's these movements like Black Lives Matter, like the critical theory movements that kind of offer this movement that makes people feel like, oh wow, I belong here.
I'm
But in
part of
actuality,
something.
yeah, they're tearing up the roots of what it means to be. I mean, with God, this is the other thing. When people talk about the concept of home, community, belonging, they don't talk about ethics. And so I'm basically saying, when you enter your house, one of the good things about your house is it's ordered, right? I mean, obviously it can be dirty or whatever, but like you know where it is, you know how it works. So part of the conversation about community is ethics. I think, people are anxious because they're saying, there's no such thing as two genders, there's multiple genders. Well, I think that's going to make you feel restless. I mean, it's not how God created you. So, yeah, that's how I got it. And I reached out to Rusty Reno at First Things, and he's great. We had a little bit of back and forth, and I'm still telling myself, do these people not realize that I'm a nobody? But Rusty sent me a recommendation for this book called The Quest for Community by Robert Nisbet. And this book was written, I think, in 1950, and it is fascinating because the things
Whoa.
that I was talking about is what he talks about. And it was one of those moments where I was like, rather than being intimidated, I was like, this actually is really good because I can kind of draw from him and bring him into the present. Because he basically argues that we've lost the authorities in our culture, which is the church, the family, and other things. And when those things fall apart,
Yeah.
we feel anxious. I think he
Yeah.
uses that exact word. It's like
Yep.
we're anxious. So, anyways, that's how I landed with with the book that I'm doing. And
Well, and I think it's interesting because like the chapter that I'm working on right now overlaps with a lot of what you're talking about. But one thing that I keep coming back to, and you're kind of alluding to this, is that really what it comes down to is the restlessness that we see in so many different categories. And you're kind of saying just whether it's chasing progress, like looking forward, trying to strive towards something better, or saying, oh, I just want to go back. I want to go back to a time before the internet. I want to go back to a time when things were different. That sort
hmm
of restlessness, from my own research and what I'm seeing, it really can all come back to just the secular age that we're in, where we've completely abandoned, well, essentially Christ, but
hmm
right, like you said, church, the structure of the way God has ordered things to be,
hmm
and we've abandoned it in all the different ways, that it seems like every category of our lives, there is a sense of anxiety or restlessness where we're looking every which way to try
hmm
to find that sense of rest or belonging or, whatever that might be. And one of the things that when I was looking at your proposal and reading your article, that I'm like, I'm seeing this everywhere. But the two places that I feel like it's manifesting in a very tangible way online that I've seen more recently. The first one is I saw this viral reel where people were like, throwing out the Christmas decor that's silver and gold and fancy and luxurious or whatever for this 90s vibe, and they're going to Target and they're throwing all this 90s vibe Christmas, and then they're just like decorating their living room so it can almost give them this sense that they are doing Christmas in the 90s. Could you
hmm
just kind of, oh well, and hold on, the other one, which this isn't more recent, but, you think back to COVID when in the middle of the pandemic, that was sort of like this hard stopping point for the hustle movement. And then all of a sudden people start making sourdough out of nowhere and everybody's
Yeah.
homesteading and buying chickens
Yep.
and kind of returning to more ancient practices, if you will, like
hmm
manual labor and churning butter. And, all of these things are interconnected. And I think that people have noticed that. People have noticed that everywhere, you're seeing this word analog being thrown around where
Yeah.
people are trying to do these more analog things. And they're resisting or rejecting the technology and the AI and all of this stuff, and,
Hmm.
can you just kinda speak into that in the context of your book?
Yeah, I should have mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that actually led me down this path, and actually the first piece that I wrote on country music, a recurring theme for me. I'm a very angsty, like I was an angsty high schooler or middle schooler. Like I was, into going to the mall, and I didn't go to Hot Topic a lot, but my friends and I, we would do the hey, let's see how long you can last in Hot Topic because it's kind of crazy, and we go in there, or like like we would do that, and I still like pop punk, like, but it's interesting to me because there's a nostalgia element, and that's something that actually led me to where I'm writing now. I'm very fascinated by nostalgia. I'm fascinated by how we look at the past, how we we long for the past in many ways. I studied American history when I was in college, and the past to me is really important. And I think what we see is and I think Jonathan Haidt and other people have talked about this, but the rise of the digital age. New York Times put out this post, and it was like Gen Z longs for a time that they never knew. And so Gen Z kind of longs to go back before the digital age that they were impacted by. And those things are really helpful, but personally, I'm a little bit like burnt out on the constant, well, tech, 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 tech. And that's why I did the triad, because I think it's more than just tech. I think Gen Z does long for a time before internet, sure, but I wrote a piece recently with the American Mind. I'm not sure if you read that one, but I
I
basically
did, yeah.
argue if I argue that it's not just tech, because Gen Z grew up with major cultural shifts. They grew up with, I mean, Trayvon Martin, and you kind of saw the Black Lives Matter movement. They grew up with um, the climate movement really picking up. Um, they grew up with COVID. I mean, my wife was in college during COVID. Like that was huge. And then I talk about Bruce Jenner and transgender movement. And I think there are more. Those four aren't the only ones. But if you look at those, each one was uprooting Gen Z in a different way. And so the thing that I resonate with the tech arguments, but I don't resonate with them because I think there's more to it than just tech. I think there's actual cultural implications too when you say, well, there's no longer two genders, or basically we're gonna essentially divide you by race because that's what's good for our culture. When you do those things, you uproot people. And I think these young people, they grew up with that. And so they never really had the bonds that older generations had. And again, in my book I nuance this because I I'm I love my wife's a farm girl. Like I'm a big fan of, everything outdoors and country. Like I'm a country boy at heart. Like that's I mean, like I told you before, I'm gonna go hunt after this interview. But I think the thing that I can't quite I don't think is gonna work is that when people pursue that kind of superficial,
It's
like,
like an
oh, I'm a
aesthetic.
yeah, an aesthetic. I was talking to Felicia Masonheimer about this, and she brought up a good point. Those things used to be skills that people had. And what happened is younger generations, they didn't grow up with those skills. Like they were never taught to sew a button. I mean, my wife was. It's fantastic. I'm terrible at it. My wife could sew on a button, no problem. But Felicia was saying like some young girls didn't grow up with that. And so now they see it and they're like, oh, this is a cool aesthetic. Like, look at me now. I'm doing this thing. But back in the day, that was just a skill. That was a skill you knew. And so I think in some ways, what we're going to see is there's a little bit of superficiality to it. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is you can do the trad wife thing. You can, go all out.
Yep,
But
yep,
if you're not rooted in a
yep.
community, and I think that's what Nisbet argues, and I'm basically arguing for is localism, which localism, to people who don't know, is just essentially that, you know, you should be plugged into your local community. And so your local church, you should know your neighbors. You should, have connections, hang out with friends in person. And that's something Nisbet was arguing for in the 50s before any of this stuff. And so my whole point is like, look, if you're on Instagram and you have 300,000 followers and you're posting trad videos, but you're not connected and plugged in to your local community, I'm just not sure that's going to help you be rooted. Um,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
to your point, yeah, I think it's kind of being sold as a product. I mean, that's kind of what consumerism
yeah.
does, right?
Oh, yeah. There's so many layers to all of this. It's like
Yeah.
it's seemingly unending. Uh, but I think you're right in, the triad that it's more than just technology. I think you talk about this, the concept of, like, spiritual homelessness,
Hmm.
that much of this kinda comes back to that if you aren't if you aren't rooted in something that is ultimately or authoritative or objective
Hmm.
or true,
Yeah.
because that's the other complexity here is obviously secularism wouldn't be secularism if it wasn't also postmodernism, if we weren't, living in a world that believes that you can determine your own truth.
Hmm.
And, even, in who is it? Jen Hatmaker,
Hmm.
or just the deconstruction movement, Jen Hatmaker's new memoir that's come out. I haven't read it yet, but I've done enough research and reading reviews on it and stuff, though I wanna read it because I think it would be
Yeah.
fascinating. You read from these different sort of I don't even know how you would describe them, but the people that kind of fall in this box of they're gonna talk about Jesus, and they may even say they believe in God, so they're theists,
Yeah.
but their theology or their doctrine is just, woo, all over the place, just like a wave,
Yeah.
There is no rooted there's
Hmm.
nothing that's rooted in scripture or
Yeah.
rooted in sort of this authoritative truth, and so it's, "I love Jesus," or "I believe in God." And
Hmm.
I would even probably say that there's a lot of people in society nowadays that would say, I still think there's a good 60 to 65% of people that say they believe in God, that they believe that
Hmm.
Jesus is real, all these things, but the belief system isn't
Hmm.
rooted in scripture. And so I do think that the it really all comes back to if we are not anchoring our beliefs in some sort of objective truth, then
Hmm.
really everything else just kind of goes off the rails here. Which
Yeah.
can you speak to the spiritual homelessness stuff?
Yeah. I think it goes back to as well, and this is not like a legalism either. It's a sense that like I think what you're getting at is if people are just like, I love Jesus, but I'm still going to do my own thing. To me, the spiritual homelessness is the sense that when I like to think of it like a home, and I say this in the intro to the book, and maybe it'll get nixed. I don't know, but I struggle with anxiety, and when I'm away on trips for work, I get anxious and I get actual like symptoms, like my throat tightens up, and I feel unwell. Like it's just, and my wife is definitely a comfort to me in that, and the Lord, and it's great to have those things. But I say in the book, the thing that actually ultimately what it goes away. I mean, obviously with the Lord, I'm comforted and helped, but it immediately goes away when I step inside my front door. Like I don't have it. And why is that? It's because I feel safe and secure in my house. And there's a structure and order to my house. I mean, I'm a creature of habit. I have oatmeal every morning like my grandfather did, and have my cup of coffee, but there's a structure and order to my house that, I'm the husband, my wife's the wife, my daughter's the daughter, my dog's the dog. Like there's an order there that happens, and we kind of have our roles that we participate in. And I kind of blow that out into society, which is like, it's one thing if you like step into I guess what I'm getting at is if you step out from a secular society into a church that matches the secular society, you're not stepping out of the society. So if you on Sunday go to your church and they're saying the exact same thing that culture is saying, you're not actually getting respite from the cultural winds. I mean, I just that's just the reality of it. And I think the problem is people don't think that Jesus made provocative moral claims on us, which he very much did.
Yeah.
Man and woman, he created them. I refuse to hear a good argument for how Jesus would affirm multiple genders when
Yeah.
he clearly roots it in Genesis. And so to me, that's why I think a lot of these books in this category can be lacking is because they kind of talk about home and they're like, it feels so great to be in your home. And I'm like, yeah, it's great to be in your home. But if my home was chaotic, if my daughter was like functioning like my dog, like that wouldn't work. That's not how she's created to be by God. She's created to be my daughter. And I think what we do in society is we kind of remove those those structures. And then we're like, well, I feel anxious, I feel lonely, I feel miserable. It's like, well, you kind of remove the things that God created around you to support you. And when you do that, that's going to make you feel this spiritual homelessness. So I kind of take it from Augustine as well, where he basically over and over again in all of his works, Confessions, City of God, he stresses that our hearts are longing for God. And so I firmly believe that every single person is longing for this. Like even the person who's like, you know what, I don't like your argument. I think, you know, I have my gay pride flag, all this stuff. I'm like, I think deep down you do really long for this because God created us a certain way, and um, he we're only going to be satisfied in Him and His order. So I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the spiritual homelessness is just indicative of the fact that we were created to be with God, which a chapter in my book I'm going to talk about in the garden. Man was sent out. There was a home, right? We had a structured home. Man was the gardener. He was the first man. He's going to till the land. And woman was there and she was supporting and living with him and they were in harmony and all was good. And then what happened is Satan said, hey, you can be like God. And I'm saying that's basically what we're being asked. And we're leaving our Edenic paradise when we say, I actually would rather live like the world. And then we wonder why we're like the Israelites in the wilderness, perpetually wandering and lonely and, falling for all this stuff. So that's ultimately the ground floor for me.
Yeah, and it is kinda wild because this is exactly what I am wrestling with in the chapter that I'm working on, and there's two kinda points that I wanna tug on, but I think I wanna go back to the whole aesthetics
Hmm.
superficiality of all of it,
Yeah.
because, like, what you were saying, it makes a lot of sense in that, so, if which he did, right? In Genesis 3, he creates us, and he's gonna create us with well, we're not robots, of
Hmm.
course, but he's created us with certain proclivities and desires and, well, he's created us in his image and all of
Hmm.
these things. This is all just as an inventor would invent like a car, they're going to invent it in such a way that it needs certain things, that it requires certain things, that if it's not functioning as it was designed to function, that
Hmm.
things are going to break, things are going to go
Yeah.
awry, all that stuff. And of course, the same is true for us. And it's almost like what we're seeing right now in culture is like, the longing is there. The
Yeah.
longing for this, transcendent desire, if you will, in just union with God and just what we were ultimately created for in God and in Christ. The longing is there, but the pathway that we're trying to find it is in the superficial or the
Hmm.
earthly stuff, even the more aesthetics, which to me has been a very fascinating thing. And it's definitely a theme that's woven throughout my book is I have found it's just really interesting to me that aesthetics are such a whether it's aesthetics, maybe it's identity, and maybe it does kind of come back to belonging that if I look
Hmm.
the part, then that's
Yeah.
who I'll be. All of that is just it's interesting that it is so prevalent, but yeah, I don't know if I
It ties into your concept as well because the thing that someone told me when I was working on my proposal is they said, what about the material aspect? And I think that kind of gets at a little bit what you're talking
oh,
about.
like consumerism too.
Yeah, and not only that, but like if you think about it, you and I as young millennials is like our parents were able to buy houses for like, you know, $90,000
It's
and
tragic.
we can't afford it. I mean, I have a house thankfully, but it's like, it's almost unaffordable. My wife and I, we both have to work. I mean, back in the day, it was, the wife she didn't really have to work. I mean, if they didn't want it, we would love it for my wife to be at home. She would love that's like what she wants, which she does work from home. But it's like we just can't really afford it. And so I think um that drive as well has kind of created this like hyper focus on like I need this, and I get it because I mean I'm in it,
Right,
So
right,
I think when that person pointed that out to me, I was like, yeah, there's actually a material aspect to why people are so angsty and like feeling rootless because they think that, oh, if I get my house, if I get my car, if I have the well-paying job, my wife's at home and she's happy, like,
Yeah.
I'll be satisfied, and it's like, I don't know if it's how that works.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's a really good point because there's a lot of things in our world, especially like in the West today, that we really don't want for anything for the most part. We're
Mhm.
pretty we're pretty well taken care of. I do think for the most part, we live in a lot of luxury that we don't really
Yeah.
realize, but that is one category, the whole housing market thing
Mhm.
that feels extremely unattainable because and that is a big deal for a lot of people, even, and I can even speak to this just like you can. It is sort of a pain point to say like,
Mhm.
"Man, I'm not over here looking for a mansion," but even
Yeah.
just a standard home that our family, our parents would have lived in is astronomical.
Mhm.
You can't even it's not even realistic to afford. You'd be kinda dumb to unless you were extremely well off,
Yeah.
to try and move into something like that right now, and so I do think that there has kinda grown this false belief that, okay, that's sort of the problem here, like,
Yeah.
I just gotta, achieve that or obtain that, and then, I'll be kinda settled a little bit, but all of these things ultimately it's like it's one of those things where this stuff is all relatively really new,
Mhm.
but it also goes back to Ecclesiastes that there's really nothing new under the sun. Because to your point, when we look at Genesis, when we look at Eden, when, the serpent comes to her and she has everything she could ever need. She's living in
Mhm.
paradise. She's living in union with God, and yet he just directs her attention at what she doesn't have,
Yeah.
and like you said, kinda says, "Did God really say?" And, just implants that doubt and gives
Mhm.
her sort of a different desire, and that sort of disordered longing, if you will, is has been around forever,
Mhm.
and we're constantly searching if we're not and it's isn't it what Augustine says?
Mhm.
The soul isn't restless, or what is the quote? It's like
Yeah.
the opening line,
It's
our "Oh
basically that
God."
the soul finds rest in you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
don't
not
have it
gonna
on the top of
find
my head
rest
either.
until it finds rest in you.
Yeah.
I feel like that's, like, the ultimate truth here.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanna kind of shift too, because one other, like, common thing that we're seeing that is all connected with all of this is people are returning to church, but a lot of people are turning to more traditional churches. You're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of people go to, like, Orthodox,
Mhm.
this sort of thing. But you kind of talk a little bit about, and we've kind of briefly talked about this, but that there's a longing for that. People are returning to church, and maybe they're returning to more traditional liturgies. Um, Maybe even that in and of itself isn't as anchored or rooted as we think. So, can you speak to that too?
Yeah. So I grew up Catholic. I was Catholic for 20 years,
I didn't
and
know that.
yeah, and I have a lot of good friends who are Catholic, and now I'm not, but I think um one of the things about the book that I think is interesting is that my m- my ultimate focus with the discussion is more around, and I think this gets at what you're saying, is more around the fact that a person truly desires Christ. And what I mean is that, you know, if a young guy comes up to me and is like, "Hey, I'm starting to go to the Catholic Church because I'm so excited about the liturgy." I feel like that's not exactly what I'm getting at. I'm going to this church because I'm really excited about Jesus, and you know what I mean? Like, there's a conversation there where I think for the point of the book is that what I'm arguing for is that this person genuinely desires the Lord first and foremost, desires Scripture, and is desiring the community. And so I'm not trying to advocate for, hey, just go into any church door and you're good. Like, so kind of what I'm doing with it is I talk about the Nicene Creed at the end. And basically what I think is that obviously there are books to be read and written on the difference in doctrine. There are very clear doctrinal differences between Catholicism, between Orthodox, between Protestants like us. Like, they're very clearly different. But my hope is that, um, for this book, I can kind of say to people, hey, you're wrestling with this. And I don't want you to just go to a church because you feel like it's traditional. I want you to go to a place because, first of all, you want to commune with the Lord, you want to commune with his people. And I think this is the other part that people don't realize is that the ethics and the morality align with what scripture teaches. Like, if you step into a church and you're like, oh, wow, these people are great, but then they start espousing stuff from the pulpit that's very, very opposite the ethic that Christ taught, which is very clearly that marriage between a man and a woman. Like, let's just start with that one. If you go in and you're like, wow, this church is got beautiful interior, I like the people, and then all of a sudden the pastor comes up and says, we're going to preach on why homosexuality is not a sin. To me, that's a super clear indication you are in the wrong place. um, and then, of course, if you're like, hey, I just want to go to traditionalism because it's going to make me feel safe. Again, you're missing the point because that in and of itself is not finding your rest in the Lord. That's finding your rest in a liturgy. Um, so I do believe that there is a heartfelt desire for Christ that could lead someone to liturgy and liturgical churches and high churches. The focus of my book is going to be more on making sure that you're checking those boxes internally before you're going to a place. So, you know, I think we as Tim Keller talks about that, we are idol machines, we're idol makers, right? We always constantly make idols to worship. And so I think the same is true. And again, not disparaging or downplaying doctrinal difference, there clearly is, but I think for the purpose of what I'm talking about, I want to make sure that young people, if they do end up in a liturgical church or a high church, that they're there because they are pursuing the Lord and not because they're pursuing the pure tradition. Um, and I think Nicaea too. It really unites believers. I talk about the universal church, the body of believers, and I think that's something we need to get back to as well. Is like when we talk about ecumenical, we're always thinking like, oh, like pride flags, things like that. And I'm like, no, like there's a coalition of people who are very conservative who affirm Nicaea, that we believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth. I think it's so important that we get back to that truth when we fight these battles. So, one of the people that was a big inspiration to me was Rod Dreher, because he and I met a couple times and he's become a friend. One of the things that was crazy is his book came out, Live Not by Lies. It came out in 2020 during COVID. And I remember reading that with my wife. We had just gotten married. And the thing that hit me with it was he has a story in there where basically he says, you could be in a battle line and you look to your right and you see a Catholic, and you look to your left and you see an Orthodox, and a Protestant. But the thing is, the battle line is very clearly over these ethical issues. And I think that's kind of what this book is trying to do is say, like, there's a little bit of a coalition we need to form around this draw to community, that the church no longer can just be like, hey, come here and we'll fill you with feeling good and with love. It's like, no, the church is an outpost, and it has the banner up and it says, this is what we are. This is what the Lord has called us to be. Um, and just kind of speaking that into the culture. So that's kind of my inspiration with this book. On a personal level, of course, I, would love for people to come to the church that I go to, but but on a
Right.
broader level, I am trying to do something a little more ecumenical in the conservative sense of that term.
What does ecumenical mean?
Sorry, yeah, ecumenical just means,
I'm not as academic as you are, Eddie,
no,
Mr.
no, it's fine.
Doctorate.
I actually stepped out of the doctorate.
You did?
Yeah, I was all but dissertation, and I guess we should have talked about this early on, but I was super burnt out and just like I felt like my dissertation writing was like, I don't know, killing me like internally. So I did not feel joy. And I had been wrestling with it for 8 months, and this writing took off, and I was like, I get joy out of doing this. Like, I want to help people. Which of course PhDs can help people, but I decided, with a lot of counsel from my pastors, from my wife, was I think I'm gonna forego this. And what do
Mm.
you know? The like 2 months
Wow.
after I forego it, I get this
Holy
this
moly.
book come up. So,
Wow.
but ecumenical just means, in the sense of, that when we talk about, I guess like, it would be easier rather than giving a description, giving an example. When we talk about the Catholic Church, Catholic meaning universal, what do we mean by that? We mean all the believers around the world who would
Right.
affirm Jesus is Lord and
Yeah.
affirm, the Nicene Creed, which is what we've taught,
Yeah. Like the
the
core doctrine.
triune,
Yeah.
yeah, the core doctrine, triune God. Um, what that doesn't mean is, I think what people try to make it mean is like, well, we don't really care about secondary issues in the sense of like, which I don't think this is a secondary issue, but they say, homosexuality, things like that. And I'm like, no, that's not what ecumenical means. That's something totally different. Ecumenical to me is the biblical church that is made up of different believers who definitely have different means of worshiping, but are united around the core essentials,
Yeah.
which to me is, man and woman being created in God's image, and marriage. And so that's when I throw around ecumenical, I'm saying people like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I love that you say that because I do think that you're seeing nowadays, I don't know if I'm not probably as well versed or studied in like church history. And so I don't necessarily know if you look at now, present day versus 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, when it comes to denominations or just practices and because I think obviously there's doctrines, but there's also
Hmm.
just what's the word I'm looking for, there's traditions and sacraments and different things like that. I love that you're kind of saying, yes, everybody can find their own church
Yeah.
and whatever, but to kind of take a step back and say there is one universal church and we are
Hmm.
all the body,
Yeah.
and to unite around those things. And because you're seeing a lot of division nowadays, and
Yeah.
there's just so much fragmentation even within the body, which is it is discouraging. And maybe it's just because I when you're online you see it. I don't feel it as
Yeah.
much in the local sphere, I would say. But yeah.
But I
Okay.
think part of it too is, and this is a big thing for my book, is like, I don't believe we were meant to be caught up online in all the things that we're caught up in. And what I mean is, like, this is the hot topic issue, but I'll just bring it up. Like, the stuff Candace Owens is talking about is crazy, but also like, we were not meant, like, the average person was not meant to be theorizing and thinking about those things. One, they're wrong, but like two,
Amen.
it's just way outside of your, and
Yeah.
that's why I think,
Capacity. Yeah.
this book and what I'm working on is really just trying to say, look, like, just shut that off, go find your neighbor, plug into people with people in your church. I even think like local politics, like get involved in local
Yes.
politics,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
because I think people are getting caught up in this stuff online where they're like, oh wow, my opinion about this conspiracy theory is like gonna change it. And it's like, I don't know, like, so I guess that's,
Yes.
if anyone takes away anything, it's that I think that's going to be the thing that will help root us, is
Right.
get plugged into your local community,
Yes.
your
Yes.
neighbors, your friends, and try to limit your exposure to things. Again, I don't believe God intended us to be caught up in all of these things that are outside of our control. It's just going to cause us anxiety and
Yep.
rootlessness.
Amen. I would this is where I would love to land the plane, so I'm so glad you said all of that. But I just was talking to somebody about this like a couple of days ago, and whether it be Candace Owens or any of the other people out there that are really caught up in whether it be conspiracy theories or even just the AI theories and all this sort of world-ending discussion,
Hmm.
or almost sort of like dark web conversations. I don't even know
Yeah.
how you want to describe it. But I 100% agree with you that well, it's almost as if it's like we go right back to the Garden of Eden, just Genesis 3, just that seeking the knowledge that is only something that God should have. Like, we want
Yeah.
to know all. It's a control problem too. We wanna be in control of all of it, and I love that you said, like, we're humans, finite, and, w even if we find out that something is true, whether it be a conspiracy, is that really
Yeah.
going to
And
affect
I
your.
mean, with COVID, it's like, when I say conspiracy theory, it's like people are like, "Oh, you're throwing down everything," and I'm like, "Man, I'm skeptical of things.
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
one of those people that's like, throwing
I
conspiracy
believe
meaning
everything, yeah, yeah,
yeah, like I'm not at all that, but I at the same time, I think again, to land the plane, I think what we're seeing is this resurgent Gnosticism, which was secret knowledge in the early church. You said, is there similarities? Well, there's Gnosticism. And to me, what Candace Owens is doing is Gnostic because what she's saying is, I have this knowledge that's been revealed to me, and I won't share it, or I won't share my sources with you because it's been revealed to me. And case in point, I just saw today that, TPUSA had reached out and said, hey, let's have a debate. And she came out yesterday and said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to live stream your response to me, and I'm going to respond to your live stream. So it's like, again, it's a thing where she's putting this out there and saying, I have this knowledge, but she's not sharing. And so I think that's what we're seeing is this rise of Gnostic thought where people, again, be invested in your local community,
yeah,
get to know your people,
yep,
um,
yep,
hang out with your pastors, hang out with
yeah,
older people in your church,
yes,
older people, hang out with younger people.
yeah,
That's important too.
yeah,
Someone said, I think it was Felicia Masonheimer told me, she's like, it's a Titus thing, right? It's older
yeah,
women, younger women, older men, younger men. And that's
interdenominating
really
or
where
intergenerational.
yeah, that's where we're gonna need the help. So,
Yep, love
yeah,
that.
I'm excited about your project, and I'm glad you invited me on. It's always fun to chat with a friend. I texted my wife, I'm like, "I'm nervous," and she's like, "It's Justine, she's your friend. You're fine."
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, it's hard to get I think the podcast, it's more just you take something that's like a fluid dialogue and then you press record and all of a sudden, you kinda have to shake off, but no, and I think that's for the person listening is, like, maybe who felt that, what was the goal of talking about all of this? I think
Yeah,
To Eddie's point, all the interesting things that we're seeing in culture nowadays that are just, whether it be political or online, social, whether it's the tech and the AI, what all of this stuff, one all of us in some capacity is longing for union with Christ, but
mhm,
also too, we're longing for like the order and the structure that God created us to live in, which
mhm,
is to be a part of the local church, to be involved in it, to serve, to um, be in communion with other people and to live confessionally and,
yeah,
you know, depending upon each other and relying on each other and, all of that stuff. So, and I love that you even brought just back to local politics too, because we don't gotta throw the baby out with the bathwater. Getting involved, I love that you said localism, getting involved in rooting yourself in your local community and being more present in your,
mhm.
immediate tangible sphere of influence than just this sort of ethereal online community, whatever you wanna call it. So
One of the phrases I use in the book is it's recurrent is we like in Genesis in Eden, we were God's people in God's place with God's purpose. And so what I
mm,
talk about with community is we need to be a people in a place with a purpose. And I think
love that.
those three things, whether you talk about it with your church, even nation, right? We're a people. We are in a specific place with a specific purpose. The
That's so good.
Constitution. I think that to me is the building block for bringing back order to the chaos that we're seeing.
That's so good. We can just end it there. Drop the mic. Drop the mic. I love it. Such a great conversation. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on, and I hope you shoot a deer.
Yes. Hopefully it's 8 degrees out. We'll see.
Bundle up.